All right, so welcome back to Unit 4, our discussion on transoceanic interconnections. This is topic 4.2, exploration, causes and events. So, the thematic learning objective for the first section of this lecture describes general maritime expansion in Europe and how it relates specifically to state sponsorship. The theme here is governance, which would be politics when we're thinking in the terms of the SPICE-T acronym. I want to highlight the fact that we are discussing state-sponsored maritime exploration in this topic. Maritime exploration had been happening long before this period, but the 1450 to 1750 time period is where states like Portugal and Spain actually pay for explorers to take fleets out and find new lands or new trade routes. So the learning objective I'd like you to be able to achieve by the end of this lecture is be able to describe the role of states in the expansion of maritime exploration from 1450 to 1750. Historically, new states supported transoceanic maritime exploration. It occurred in this period. So how and why did European states expand maritime exploration efforts? Before we get into the specific states' efforts to expand maritime exploration, it is important to understand how and why this new state-sponsored era of exploration occurred in general. These new ocean journeys, they were dangerous, but still, Europeans wanted to partake. We know from topic 4.1 on technological innovations that maritime tools were borrowed or adapted from other cultures, which enabled better navigation and more efficient ships. Shown here on this slide is an astrolabe, a star chart, and a magnetic compass. The reasons why European states wanted to pursue maritime exploration is often reduced to 3 G's: gold, glory, and God. This will be explained in further detail on the next slide. So let's talk about gold, God, and glory. The quest for gold came through mercantilism. If you take a look at your guided notes on the first page of Unit 4, Topic 2, in the Key Terms Additional Notes section, there's a word there, mercantilism. I want you to define that term in your guided notes, so please make sure you add that to your guided notes in the margin section of your guided notes. So rather than looking for literal piles of gold, the goal was to find new trade opportunities that would help bring more gold and silver into a given country in order to increase its wealth. Control over trade routes and ports was a major motivator for states to sponsor expedition to new places. This is certainly the major reason that European states were racing to claim new routes via exploration missions. Religious motivations also played a role in why Europeans wanted to sail to new places. Part of their duty as Christians was to convert non-believers or conquered people. For the individuals that chose to undertake such risky voyages, fame and glory both for the individual and the home state. So now let's turn our attention to the search for new trade routes. The Silk Roads included the maritime routes that connected Asia to Europe in terms of trade during this time period. Trade in spices was extremely lucrative, and the Spice Islands were a coveted destination for sea merchants. The problem with the route to Asia and Southeast Asia was that the Mediterranean sea route was monopolized by Italian cities. They effectively controlled the prices of all the goods that entered the rest of Europe. Additionally, when Constantinople was captured by the Ottoman Turks in 1453, they gained significant control over the Silk Roads. Europeans had to pay extremely high taxes to access overland trade routes once the Ottomans took control. These developments pushed Europeans to look for new potential trade routes. Explorers would head both south around Africa and westward towards the Americas to search for alternative maritime routes to Asia. This is the major driving force behind this new wave of state-supported exploration. So now in this next section, we explore the specific states that engage in new transoceanic travel and trade with a focus on the theme of economics. So by the end of this section, I want you to be able to explain the economic causes and effects of maritime exploration by the various European states. Historically, Portuguese development of maritime technology and navigational skills, it led to increased travel to and trade with Africa and Asia, and resulted in the construction of a global trading post empire. Spanish sponsorship of the voyages of Columbus and subsequent voyages across the Atlantic and Pacific dramatically increased European interest in transoceanic travel and trade. Northern Atlantic crossings were undertaken under English, French, and Dutch sponsorship, often with the goal of finding alternate sailing routes to Asia. So let's first examine the Kingdom of Portugal in 1570. Portugal is located in the southwest corner of the Iberian Peninsula in Europe. Its location made it a prime candidate for exploration in a new direction, rather than through the Mediterranean. Portugal has long been considered an ocean-facing nation, and that is due to the maritime empire established during the Age of Exploration. The map pictured was published in an atlas in 1570. It has been rotated to point north to match the pink European continent on this slide. Notice the Portuguese caravel at the bottom of the map. So let's talk about Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator was the son of Portuguese King John I, and he is credited with initiating the Age of Exploration, or Age of Discovery as it is also called. Henry directed the development of the Portuguese caravel, that lightweight ship that used lateen sails, remember the triangular sails that we discussed in the last section. This small, quick, and highly maneuverable ship helped kickstart explorations by the Portuguese. At the age of 21, Henry helped his father capture the Moroccan port of Ceuta, which was home to Muslim pirates that frequently raided the Portuguese coast. Control over this port meant that Portugal could control all shipping through the Strait of Gibraltar. Henry continued to explore and to fund explorations of the African coast and of islands in the Atlantic. His leadership and direction was the beginning of European expansion and colonization through maritime exploration. So Portugal discovers Madeira and the Azores. Madeira is an island located directly west of Morocco. Sailing for Prince Henry the Navigator, two Portuguese captains, João Gonçalves Zarco and Tristão Vaz Teixeira, made landfall on the uninhabited island known as Madeira. This marked Portugal's first territorial discovery, meaning the first unknown land that they claimed as their own. Portuguese settlers turned Madeira into a very profitable wheat and sugarcane production center, which directly benefited the two captains that discovered Madeira and Prince Henry, who funded the mission. The success of Madeira encouraged other captains to make discoveries of their own, thus kicking off the Age of Exploration. Portugal would later claim and settle the Azores archipelago, shown on the map in 1427. The Azores are located about 750 miles, or 1,200 kilometers, from the coast of Portugal, which tells us that trips to the Azores were the furthest out in open, not along the coast, for any European sailors, and that those ships and crew were capable of fairly long journeys away from the coastlines. One of the first maps of the Azores is featured in the bottom center of this slide. So pictured in the lower right is the island of Madeira. So let's talk about Portugal sponsors maritime exploration. Prince Henry wanted Portugal to explore the coast of Africa for a couple of reasons. One, he was interested in circumventing the overland trade, which the trans-Saharan trade route, and wanted to find sources of gold and slaves for Portugal to have direct access to. Two, he wanted to know how far south Muslim territories extended. And three, he thought Portugal could unite with a fabled lost Christian kingdom, never proven that this kingdom ever existed. Captain Gil Eanes had been given a crew and ship by Prince Henry in order to make this dangerous trip around Cape Bajador in 1433. Eanes' first attempt was unsuccessful, and he and his crew were blown west to the Canary Islands, where slaves were captured so Eanes wouldn't be returning empty-handed. In 1434, he was given yet another ship for a second attempt at rounding the Cape. This was a successful trip, which opened the door for Portuguese exploration of Africa's coasts. So I want to ask you this question. I want you to pause the slide and think about it for a second. What alternate route to India, Southeast Asia, is opened up once Portugal was able to pass Cape Bajador? Pause the video, ask yourself that question real quick. What alternate route to India, Southeast Asia, will now be opened up once Portugal was able to pass Cape Bajador? So this event, it paved the way for Vasco da Gama to discover the route around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa as the new route to India and Southeast Asia. So we have more firsts for Portugal. Bartholomew Diaz was commissioned by King John II of Portugal to find a new trade route by sailing around the southern tip of Africa. Diaz succeeded in getting around the Cape in 1488, but he did not press on because his crew and ships were in very rough shape. His turnaround point was on the eastern side of what is now South Africa. One of the keys to the success of his voyage was the fact that his ships left the coastline and swung out into open waters before rounding the Cape. Had they stayed close to the coast, the treacherous waters would have likely prevented him from making it around the Cape of Good Hope and then back to Portugal. Just 10 years after Diaz's voyage around the Cape of Good Hope, another Portuguese explorer, Vasco da Gama, became the first European to sail around the Cape and reach India. This was the ultimate goal for Portugal, to find a new trade route to India and Southeast Asia. This new route to Asia opened up Portugal to become a colonial empire in Africa, and it marks the beginning of the age of imperialism. More on that later in this course. Portugal's trading post-empire. The increased maritime travel that Portuguese were able to successfully engage in led to Portugal building a trading post empire. As opposed to conquering and settling large amounts of territory, a trading post empire is based on small forts in strategic locations so that trade routes can be favorably controlled. Portugal set up trading posts in an effort to dominate the lucrative spice trade that originated in Southeast Asia. Some of Portugal's trading posts are labeled on the map. Notice that trading posts such as Hormuz and Malacca gave Portugal control over bottleneck straits where ships carrying goods had to pass. You may recall from earlier in the course the conflict between the Chola dynasty and the Srivijaya Empire surrounding the Strait of Malacca for this very same reason. It's all about control over trade. Trading posts will be covered in more detail in topic 4.4 when we cover maritime empires established. So that takes us to Columbus's proposal, a westward route to Asia. Spain was a little behind Portugal in maritime exploration because they occupied with the Reconquista, the recapturing of land from the Moors in the Iberian Peninsula, which ended in 1492. While Portugal was solidifying control of a route to Southeast Asia by going around Africa, Spain began looking for a westward route to Southeast Asia. Christopher Columbus was an Italian who had devised a plan to find Asia and Southeast Asia by sailing west from Europe across what was then called the Ocean Sea, a large single ocean between Europe and Asia. Columbus first submitted his plan to King John II of Portugal in 1484, and it was rejected. In 1486, Columbus took his plans to Queen Isabella of Spain, but was denied for the same reason King John II rejected his plan. His estimation of the distance required to travel was too low. He tried again to convince Portugal to sponsor his mission in 1488, but as Bartholomew Diaz had just successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope, Portugal did not feel the need to find yet another route to Asia. In January of 1492, the Spanish court again heard Columbus's pitch and rejected it. But King Ferdinand feared that Columbus would gain sponsorship for his voyage from an enemy of Spain, so Columbus finally received the green light from Spain for his mission. Ferdinand and Isabella were not confident that Columbus would return, so in terms they gave him were exceedingly generous compared to other exploration voyages of the time. Erdäpfel is German for Earth Apple, which is the name of the oldest surviving globe model of the world. This was produced in the 1490s, just before Columbus's voyage to the Americas, which is why the Americas are completely missing from it. This would be a good point to note that people at this time, they did not think that the Earth was flat. In fact, most prominent thinkers from the ancient Greeks and Romans to the medieval era in Europe had constructed spherical or round notions of the world. The photo on the left is a picture of the actual Erdäpfel globe. The map on the right is a modern representation of the side of that globe, in which one large ocean is displayed where the Americas should be. So here we have a 1491 map used by Columbus. Though tough to make out much detail in this picture, this is a picture of one of the actual world maps that Christopher Columbus probably studied when planning his initial westward trip to Asia from Europe. This map was produced by Henricus Martellus, a German cartographer, and was lost to historians until 1960 when it was anonymously donated to Yale. Using high-tech imaging software and special photographing methods, the detail was slowly revealed. Though quite different than any modern map, the continents of Africa, Europe, and Asia are visible. I want you to take a moment, pause the lecture, and try to identify some key areas if you can. Okay, if you were able to take a look at the map, hopefully you're able to point out some key details. I did put a link in the description for more detailed reading about this particular map. Please visit the news.yale.edu website link that I have in the description. So Spain enters the age of exploration. By agreeing to sponsor Columbus's voyage to find a new route to Asia, Spain entered the age of exploration alongside Portugal. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain only approved Columbus's voyage out of concern that Columbus would find a rival to sponsor him. They didn't actually expect Columbus to make it to Asia, but mainly because his calculations of the distance were repeatedly and heavily underestimated. However, Spain wanted to reap the possible rewards of the discovery of any new lands or routes. Columbus was granted 3 ships and a crew to undertake the journey. He was promised grand titles and a 10% cut of any revenue generated from his endeavors. So let's look at Columbus's expeditions from 1492 to 1502. Despite the reluctance of both Portugal and Spain to fund Columbus's proposed voyage to find a westward route to Asia, his first trip, marked in pink on this map, proved fruitful for Spain. Even though he did not actually find a passage to Asia, his voyages to the New World were incredibly lucrative for Spain, and these voyages dramatically increased European interest in transoceanic travel and trade. More time will be spent looking at the effects of Columbus's voyages to the New World later in this unit. Okay, so here you have a excerpt which is from a letter to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella from Columbus in 1493 after Columbus's return to Spain. In it, Columbus describes the inhabitants of Hispania, which is one of the islands he first explored in the Caribbean on his first voyage to the New World. So in your guided notes, I'd like you to read the excerpt, highlight it and annotate it, and then you're going to switch to the next page and answer the questions related to the motives for exploration. Couple questions I want you to answer in your packet. Number 1, what does Columbus's choice of language tell us about his attitude towards the people he encountered? 2, how does he describe himself in relation to these people? And 3, what reasons might you have to believe that Columbus is being genuine in his descriptions? What reasons might you have to believe Columbus may have embellished his descriptions? So make sure to answer those in your packet, and then go to the next slide. So that takes us to Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan is most famously known as the first person to circumnavigate the entire globe. Although the voyage he undertook did make it all the way around the world, Magellan himself did not. He died during the trip while in the Philippines, so he himself never made it back to the starting point in Spain. The remainder of Magellan's fleet, which was reduced to a single ship and 18 men, sailed back to Spain under Captain Juan Sebastian Elcano. When Magellan was initially proposing his idea of circumnavigation, he was rejected by Portuguese King Manuel several times. Magellan eventually renounced his Portuguese nationality and took his request for the funding of a new western route to the Spice Islands to Spain. King Charles I of Spain approved and funded the expedition. Magellan sailed for Spain as a Spaniard despite being born Portuguese and having completed many Portuguese maritime voyages and conquests. So here we have another excerpt. This is a letter to the Cardinal of Salzburg in 1522 from Maximilianus Transylvanus, detailing events of the voyage of Magellan through interviews with surviving crew. This portion discusses Magellan's effort at converting people in Cebu, Philippines, to Christianity. So just like before, I want you to pause this lecture. I want you to read the excerpt, highlight and annotate it in your packet, and then answer the questions on motives for exploration pertaining to this document. So 1, why was this detailed account of the conversion of the chief's grandson written? 2, To whom was it written? And 3, why does it tell us about potential motives for European exploration? So go ahead, read, annotate the document in your packet, and then answer the questions in your packet. And then when you're done, proceed to the next slide. So here we have a 1561 map of the Americas. The Strait of Magellan is a sea route located in modern-day Chile, which Magellan used to sail around the southern tip of South America on his expedition to circumnavigate the globe. This map was created much after Magellan's voyage, but it is an interesting view of how those in the mid-1500s thought of the Americas. So I have a question. What stands out to you when you examine this map? Pause this lecture for a second and think about that. What stands out to you when you examine this map? So hopefully you notice that Japan is labeled as Zipangu, is very square, large, and close to Mexico. Brazil is marked by a depiction of cannibals. North America is oddly shaped with most of Canada missing, so on and so forth. So here, this is a great reference for the general routes of the major European expeditions during the Age of Exploration. Magellan's full route is marked in blue. Now, these are very generalized routes. They don't show exact routes or stopping points. So let's continue talking about the motives for continued Spanish exploration. Gold. Although the first several voyages to the New World undertaken by the Spanish didn't yield the riches and wealth that they had hoped for, that changed when Spaniards encountered native peoples and civilizations, like the Aztecs in Mexico or the Taínos in Cuba. Hernán Cortés is perhaps one of the most infamous Spanish conquistadors of this time period and region. He spent time in Cuba from 1511 to 1519, where he managed encomiendas, more on this topic in 4.4. These are plots of land worked by non-Christian natives that had been enslaved. The enslavement of natives who were forced to work was one major source of wealth for the Spanish in the New World. After his time in Cuba, Hernán Cortés was put in charge of a Spanish expedition to the interior of Mexico for the purpose of colonization. In 1519, he landed, and Cortés began claiming territory in Mexico for the Spanish crown. When he encountered the Aztecs, it was less than 3 years until he and his army toppled the once great Aztec Empire. The Aztec had been known for their extravagant use of precious metals, including gold and silver. This is an extremely quick overview of Hernán Cortés in the New World, but the main points here are that both native slave labor, along with gold and other precious metals, were major economic factors for continued Spanish and European exploration and conquest in the New World. That's going to take us to the Northwest Passage. John Cabot was an Italian explorer, actually named Giovanni Caboto, who left Italy and sought financing from Henry VII of England for a voyage to find a Northwest Passage to Asia. He did not succeed in finding this new route to Asia, but he did claim lands in Canada for Britain, and he established a much shorter northerly route from Europe to North America. It took Britain over 100 years since Cabot's 1497 voyage to North America to establish their first settlement, Jamestown, in North America. Then we have French exploration of the Northwest Passage. France also sponsored expeditions that began with the intent of finding an alternate route to Asia via the Northwest Passage. Once Columbus's voyages revealed that the North American landmass was blocking the way to Asia, the search for a route around North America via the north began. Jacques Cartier of France embarked on a mission to find this passage in 1734, but was unsuccessful. Instead, he discovered that there were natural resources in the parts of Canada that he explored that could be valuable to France, namely trade in furs. Cartier completed 3 different voyages to Canada, and the goal of finding a passage to Asia was abandoned. Later, Samuel de Champlain embarked on several voyages to the area, and he eventually founded Quebec and French settlements in the New World as they arose. The Dutch attempt to find the Northwest Passage. The quest for the Northwest Passage continued under the Dutch sponsorship of Henry Hudson. He too was unsuccessful at locating a passage to Asia. He explored parts of what is now Canada and the United States. The Hudson Bay, the end point of the purple line on this map, is named for Henry Hudson. Additionally, the Hudson River in New York is also named for the explorer who sailed up the river in 1609. Henry Hudson claimed the Hudson River Valley and what is now New York City for the Dutch. The Dutch established a colony called New Amsterdam, located where present-day New York City is located. So what about the Northwest Passage? No explorers from this time period, 1450 to 1750, successfully located a northern passage to Asia. It wasn't until 1850 that Irish explorer Robert McClure located a passage, but it required crossing ice. No one completed an actual journey via ship until the 1900s. The water, it was just simply too frozen for ships to pass without icebreakers. And this would be a much more recent maritime invention. So the search for alternate routes to Asia. These are the states which sponsored exploration with the initial goal of finding an alternate route to Asia from Europe. Only Portugal and Spain succeeded in actually finding an alternate sea route to Asia. Much of the exploration that aimed at finding new routes to Asia, whether successful or not, resulted in new colonies and settlements around the world for European states. So that takes us to the role of mercantilism, that vocab term that I had you write down in the margins at the beginning of this lecture. Mercantilism in exploration. All the European state-sponsored expeditions were fundamentally tied to the economic system of mercantilism, which dominated Europe during the Age of Exploration. In order for a particular state to increase its wealth, which was measured in gold or other precious metals, they had to find ways to increase the amount of gold flowing into the state. This was largely done through trade and the control of trade routes. When a state could export more than they had to import, the wealth would increase. This is what fueled exploration, and that's why these alternate new routes to Asia were so important for Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Dutch. Mercantilism was responsible for the competition between these states to claim new trade routes, establish trading posts, and colonize new territories. Colonies could supply very cheap raw materials, often through the use of slave labor. The mercantilist state could then export finished manufactured goods at very high prices. Any state that could claim trade routes or new colonies had a very reliable supply of wealth. Shown on this slide is a common, very simple example of how mercantilist states gained wealth through its colonies and its control of trade. A colony could not be allowed to trade freely, creating a very cheap and exclusive supply of raw materials and labor from the controlling state. Make sure you guys are very familiar with the term mercantilism, and you should be able to explain it and how it's a leading cause of exploration during this time period. And just like that, we are done with topic 4.2, your key ideas that you should write down in your separate notebook. Major differences in exploration in this time period versus previous periods is that state-sponsored exploration. Portugal found a new route to Asia by sailing around Africa. Portugal established trading posts in Africa and India. Spain found a new route to Asia by sailing around the southern tip of South America. And Spain began colonizing the Americas. England, France, and the Netherlands failed to find an alternate route to Asia, but began claiming and colonizing lands in North America. Motivating factors for exploration include gold, God, and glory, with gold, mercantilism, being the primary factor. As always, make sure you check the Heimler's topic review for topic 4.2. The link is in the description. Have a great day.